My name's Samir Solanki. As Pastor mentioned, it's been a very rough couple of days bringing David here, and we're so appreciative of him being here, especially considering he hasn't slept in over 24 hours. So thank you so much for doing this on a Sunday morning. Please note that we will be having a question and answer session after this. The ushers will be passing out small pieces of postcard paper and write down your questions, and if you could give it back to the ushers, and we'll use those to segue into the Q&A session afterwards. It's always difficult to introduce a guest speaker, but in this case, for those of you who know Dr. Wood, you'll know that his reputation precedes him. Most people know him as the late Nabil Qureshi's best friend, whom he led to Christ, but I know him as a guy that has no fear, and I'm sure, as most of you know, would agree with me. He has a very different approach to apologetics. Apologetics comes from the Greek word apologia, which means to give an answer for the reason and the hope that is within us. So he has a very different approach. Other counterparts will do it in a sort of a different manner. They'll approach people and then, very gentle, soft, different ways. But his is very pointed. His criticism of Islam and other worldviews strike like a pointed arrow in the hearts of other people, where they start questioning, hey, why do I believe what I believe? And some people may be pushed away by that type of thing, but I got to tell you, I've been following his ministry for some years now, and there have been many, many people from Islam that have converted to Christianity through his ministry. So we thank God for what he does. I was introduced to David Wood after reading Nabil Qureshi's book, Seeking Allah, Finding Jesus. I've had the privilege of learning apologetics to Islam through his ministry. David Wood is the founder of Acts 17 Apologetics and has a very large following on YouTube, reaching almost 400,000 followers worldwide. Dr. Wood holds a bachelor's degree from Old Dominion University and a doctorate degree in philosophy from Fordham University. And he's also a member of the Society of Christian Philosophers. Dr. Wood has taken part in numerous debates in a public setting, including debates with notable Muslim apologists such as Shabir Ali. I think it's getting cut off here. So this morning, I just want to thank Dr. Wood for being here with all this, tired and aching body. But I'd like to welcome him. And church, if you could please put your hands together to welcome Dr. David Wood.
Check. Got to do that. Thank you, Samir. Oh, by the way, I did get sleep. I fell asleep on the plane and in your car for a couple minutes, so good to go. And by the way, thank you all for inviting me down to the hottest place in the world. Not during winter, in summer. That's great. It's a good idea. No, glad to be here, and I see some kids in here. I always get a little freaked out when they tell me to share my testimony and their kids around, because it's kind of rated R. I think I can dial it back to like PG-13 maybe. So other than that, the kids are just going to be a little messed up. All right, well, it's kind of weird because for a long time I actually didn't share my testimony. I only started sharing my testimony publicly because I had told some atheists that I'm a former atheist, and apparently they don't believe you. It's like saying you're a former Muslim. Muslims, no, you weren't. You were never a Muslim, right? Well, it turns out atheists are like that too. You were never an atheist. So they kept bothering me over a period of a couple of years, saying, "Oh yeah, tell us what you were like as an atheist. Tell us your life as an atheist." So I said, "Fine, I'll do it." And I went ahead and posted that. And the reason I didn't say much about my testimony over the years was it's not that it's embarrassing. I embarrass myself over and over again every single day, so I have no problem with that. It's mainly because, as you'll find out why here in a few moments, when I became a Christian, every Christian I knew was an ex-murderer, and drug dealer, or something like that. That was every single Christian I knew. So every Christian I knew came from a bad criminal background. So that was just normal. So when people would invite me, hey David, you want to go see this want to go see this Christian who used to be in the mafia. He used to be in the mafia. And I'm thinking, no, I don't care. You're going to tell me how bad you, let me guess, you're going to tell me how bad you are and now you're a Christian, everything's better right now. Not interested. I know where it's going. It's cool, but I've got other things I can do. So I wasn't really interested in that. I was much more interested in like nice Christian families and stuff like that, and like people who just serve God all their lives. I thought that's what I thought was cool, because that was different, right? I mean, everyone I knew for the first several years I was a Christian came from a massively dysfunctional background. So it was awesome to me to know that, hey, you can just live an awesome Christian life and not do that stupid stuff, right? It's like any idiot can fall down a hill. You know what I mean? It's gravity. It's gravity. You can just keep, if someone says, man, you should see how far I fell down that hill, well, then you're just an idiot, right? But that's gravity. Going up the hill, that's work. Going up the hill, that's work. So the stories about, hey, how bad I was and so on, it's just, okay, you fell really far down the hill. But that's human nature. It's not too impressive. So anyway, I didn't say much about it for years, and then made a video so I could finally silence the atheists and they could quit asking me why I was a Christian. And now people always want me to explain why I'm a Christian and share my testimony, and you got to do it. All right, so let's go ahead. Speaking of kids, my journey began when I was 5 years old. Not many people can trace their just clear path in life back to when they were 5 years old, but I can. I remember the exact day when all this started. I was 5 years old, and I had a dog named Goliath that was a little raggedy mutt, but I'd had that dog ever since I could remember. And one day, my mom got a phone call, and she turned to me with tears in her eyes and told me that Goliath had been run over by a bus. And I looked at her as she cried, and I thought, well, so what? It's just a dog. You didn't think that it was going to live forever, did you? Right, so anyway, my mom hated my dog, but she was still crying over it, and I couldn't figure out why. I thought there was something wrong with my mom. Anyway, that was when I was 5. Later on, I would see other people who had something like pets dying or something like that, and I would notice they kind of reacted the same way that my mom reacted. They would be sad, and so I'm watching this, and I'm just thinking, well, like it's spreading, right? Something weird is spreading here, that all these people, again, did you think that it was going to live forever? No, you knew it was going to die. Why are you all upset? What are your tears adding to this situation? Nothing. So what's going on here? Anyway, this kept happening over and over and over again over the years. I'll go ahead and fast forward. But when I was 18 years old, I was diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder, which if you've heard of sociopaths or psychopaths, that's what antisocial personality disorder is. And you don't form normal emotional attachments to other people. You don't experience empathy, so you don't know. When someone else is suffering, you don't feel anything as a result of people suffering around you. You have no respect for other people's rights or feelings. You don't experience guilt or remorse when you do something wrong. And some of these guys end up as serial killers. But here's the key. You don't know that. You don't know that this is a diagnosis, right? All you know when you're growing up is that you're not having the same reactions that other people have. You don't experience the same things that other people experience, and you're sort of left to figure that out for yourself unless they catch you at some point and make you see a psychiatrist, and then they come up with a diagnosis and they tell you what's going on. But I wasn't in that situation. I was a little kid having to figure this out for myself. And I noticed as I was growing up, I did not have the same reactions that other people had. I also noticed that other people didn't share some of my amazing insights into reality. Here, the first time I remember, could have been earlier times, but the first one I remember was I was 7 years old, and I was sitting beside a lake, and I was watching these ants. And I don't know if you've ever seen, trying to describe to you what this is like, because I'm assuming most people don't experience things like this. But you know those 3D pictures where you're looking at it, it just looks like a bunch of, squiggles on a paper, but if you stare at it long enough, all of a sudden it becomes this awesome 3D image? Well, it's kind of like that, where you're looking at something, all of a sudden something just becomes clear to you that you couldn't see before. But once you see it, it's just as clear as day. So I was watching these ants walk along the ground beside a lake, and all of a sudden it just became crystal clear to me that ants actually control the world, and that they had tricked us human beings into thinking that we were in charge. They were in charge, and that just shows you how brilliant and deceptive they are, that they managed to deceive the entire population of the world except me. And that sounds ridiculous, but it would just bam, and it becomes completely clear in an instant. But it doesn't last. After a while, that goes away. But that kept happening over and over, just not with ants. It was ants then. Later it would be pets. As long as a cat or a dog was acting like a cat or a dog, I had no problem. But as soon as a cat or a dog would turn and stare at me in my eyes, like a person would, I would become convinced once again that this cat or dog was actually controlling the world and making human beings do its bidding. And so if you were to catch me in third or fourth grade in the room with a pet, you might see me sitting there talking to a cat or a dog going, "I'm on to you. You think I'm as stupid as the rest of these people? I'm on to you," right? So, but that didn't last. Those would be little periodic episodes. But those things kept happening. And till the time when I was in 10th grade, by that time I thought I was convinced that I controlled the weather. I didn't know how I controlled the weather. I just knew that I controlled the weather. So when something would happen, when it would rain, I would stop and think, okay, what did I just do right before that made it rain? Notice, there's no way to prove that wrong. There's no way to prove that I wasn't controlling the rain. So with me, it was just a question of how I was doing it. And other things would happen. I would hear a song, and I would think that somehow this song is sending a message specifically towards me. I would read a book and think that somehow this book written in the 1800s was a message that is directly for me. And these things would happen over and over again. Along the same period of my life, had also put my worldview together. You're going to see how all these things come together here in a minute. But I put together my worldview. I don't remember ever believing in God when I was growing up. The only prayers I ever said would be God, if you exist, kill that person or something like that. But never a serious prayer, or never really any thought of God existing when I was growing up. And I'm not sure exactly when I acknowledged that I was an atheist. I remember clearly knowing that I was an atheist when I was about 13 or 14. I remember arguing with people about it then, but I don't remember when I officially recognized that I don't believe in God. But by the time I was 15, 16, I kind of put together my entire view of our world and our place in it. And it basically goes something like this. You've got this massive universe, and there is this tiny speck in our universe that is our galaxy. We call it the Milky Way. And one tiny, insignificant speck of a star in that pathetic little galaxy is our sun. And our planet is just some pointless rock going around that little speck and that little tiny chunk of dirt called our galaxy, and then crawling all over this insignificant, pointless rock are these lumps of cells who think that everything we do is so important and that what we really do matters. But I mean, think about it. What difference does it make? In the grand scheme of things, what difference does it make? If you kill everyone you know or you spend your life helping other people, what doesn't make a whole lot of difference. It's all going to die a heat death one day, and who cares? What we do is not going to make any sort of difference in the grand scheme of things. So, as these things came together, I had a friend named Jimmy Lindholm, and I was 16 years old and went over to my friend Jimmy's house. The whole time we were growing up, he said that he wanted to go parasailing. And he finally got to go parasailing, and his harness broke and he plummeted to his death. And I was walking away from Jimmy's house after getting that news, and I noticed that I had the same reaction I'd had when pets would die. Namely, so what? It was just going to die anyway. But here I started thinking, well, gosh, it seems like I should be bothered by my friend dying. Seems like I should be bothered in some way by my friend dying. And I started thinking, well, is there something wrong with me here? Something wrong with me? Do I have a problem? And again, you don't know what antisocial personality disorder is back then. All you know is you're trying to figure these things out for yourself. Well, I figured things out. I concluded that the reason I did not have the same emotions that the rest of people had was that I had evolved to a higher stage of humanity. So there was regular humanity, and they're controlled by their feelings and their emotions. And now humanity 2.0 had come out of that and was no longer ruled and controlled by feelings and emotions. So a new stage of humanity had arrived, and one that was governed by reason and not by feelings. So that's what I concluded, and started living my life according to that. And it was the following summer, I was running from police in the middle of the night, and they had me surrounded on three sides. Well, just to give you an idea, it was a road up here, and then a hill, and then railroad tracks down here, and then another little hill, and then the Monongahela River on that side. So police were ahead of me on the railroad tracks, and they were behind me on the railroad tracks, and they were coming down the hill beside me on the railroad tracks. They had me surrounded. The only side left was the Monongahela River. So they yelled stop, I yelled no, and I jumped in, swam across, actually beat the police across because they had to cross the bridge. So I beat the police across the river, and I understood I had to get as far away from there as quickly as possible because they were going to bring the dogs out. So I needed to get away from there really quick, so I started running up the hill. And once I got up this hill, I emerged from a patch of woods, and I was in someone's backyard. And in front of me was this beautiful garden. And just out of habit, I started to walk around the garden because I had to keep going. I started to walk around the garden, but then I paused to philosophize. And I started thinking, why am I walking around this person's garden? I don't care about the people in that house. I definitely don't care about their vegetables. Why am I being so courteous here? And then it hit me that even though I was the highest stage of humanity, I'd still been manipulated all my life into behaving in certain ways by people who were inherently inferior to me. And so I felt like like I'd been infected by some disease that you all had shared with me. But as I stomped my way through that garden, I got this incredible rush of freedom, like I had just gotten rid of something that you guys had put into me. And so that kind of becomes addictive, because if you conclude that human beings had somehow infected you with all of this, all of their views and all of their sense of morality and their sense of right and wrong, if you think that, and you come to think of it in terms of them controlling you on a leash or them infecting you with a disease, then when you start freeing yourself from that, there's this just awesome rush of freedom. But there's always more to do. And you start going down the list of everything you believe about right and wrong, and you realize it was stuff that was sort of brainwashed into you. You've been manipulated all your life. So the only way to get out of that is to do the opposite of what you've been taught. So everything that you've been taught, you have to do the opposite in order to liberate yourself from this control of other human beings. Go ahead and skip to the end here. Thanksgiving Day of 1994. Not going to go into detail because kids here. And anyway, Thanksgiving Day of 1994, I attacked my dad with a hammer. I hit him 7 or 8 times in the head with a hammer, left him for dead. It was not because I was mad about anything. It was just, that is the sort of thing you have to do. And by that time, I viewed that as like the final stage. Everything else I had done had gotten me most of the way. And once I did this last thing, I was finally just going to be completely free of everything humanity had forced into me. And I would be what I was meant to be. And so my dad actually survived that. I didn't know you could survive that sort of thing. But they took him to a hospital. The hospital said he will die here with these injuries. They airlifted him to another hospital where they had a world champion neurosurgeon, and they had to piece his skull back together. I was stuck in a mental hospital. That's where I was diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder. But that sort of thing, that is not something that you get off on insanity for, right? They say you're a psychopath. Well, good. Stick you in jail. That's where you belong. So they stuck me in jail. And while I was in jail, I met a Christian named Randy. And Randy, in case you're wondering, had turned himself in for 21 felonies. He'd done all sorts of things in life and became a Christian. He was in the Navy, was on a ship, was telling the counselor on his ship some of the things he's done in his life. And Randy decided that once he got back to the U.S., he's going to go and confess to police everything he'd done. So he went and told them everything he'd ever done, and they said, all right, we got 21 felonies here. So they charged him with all of those. And so I was in there with Randy, and he was kind of an interesting fellow. Our main source of entertainment in there was fights, and he wouldn't watch the fights. And so one day I asked him, I said, hey, did you see that fight with Corey? And he said, no. I turned away. I was praying that it would stop. So that's an interesting guy. But one day Randy was sitting on his bunk. He would sit there for hours at a time reading his Bible. And one day he was sitting there, and I walked up to him, and I said, hey, Randy, you know why you're reading the Bible? You're reading the Bible because you were born in the United States. If you'd been born anywhere else, you believe in something else. If you've been born in China, you'd be a Buddhist. If you've been born in India, you'd be a Hindu. If you've been born in Saudi Arabia, you'd be a Muslim. Because people like you believe whatever you're taught to believe. So, notice that was my view, because I was viewing myself as the one who was liberated from being influenced by other people's views and so on. When, by the way, it was totally hypocritical. If you asked what I believed about the universe and how it got here, and life, how it got here, these kinds of things, it was exactly what I heard in 9th and 10th and 11th grade science class, right? Never thought of questioning those things. So totally hypocritical. But something interesting happened when I started challenging Randy. He fought back. And this was the first Christian who ever actually fought back. Every other Christian I'd ever challenged would give some quick little response, but then as soon as they saw that you wanted to argue, with, hey, no, I don't want to argue here. I don't want to argue here. Well, I did. Anyway, Randy started arguing with me. And he had this annoying habit of asking me how I came to certain views when I would bring them up. Other people, if you tell other people, you tell your friend or something like this, come on, all scientists say, friend will just take it, right? Like assuming that you actually know what you're talking about. Randy would go, really? All scientists? You examined all scientists? Right? He would just do that, and I was thinking, no, I was just making it up, actually. I would toss all scientists on there to give it some credibility, right? So anyway, he kept doing this. Everything I would say about the universe or life or Jesus or something like this, he would just start asking me where I got these claims. And I started realizing, wow, I didn't study this stuff. I just picked it up somewhere along the line and never seriously questioned a lot of what I've been taught. So anyway, this made me really, really mad. This is not just a Christian. This is a Christian who was dumb enough to turn himself in for 21 felonies, and he's sitting there schooling me when we're arguing. And I'm the greatest human being who's ever lived. So this was really confusing to me. So I had to sort of beat him at other things. So I would say nasty things about him or nasty things about his sister when she would come to visit. And I would eventually get him angry, and he would get mad and yell at me. And then he would yell at me, and I would go, "Look at you, yelling at me. You call yourself a Christian?" You ever met an atheist like that? Anyway. So things were going along like that for a while, and then I noticed Randy wasn't bragging about it or anything, but I just noticed he was giving his meal trays to other people, sometimes to me. And so I asked him why he wasn't eating, and got the information out of him. Turns out he was fasting. And we got into the world's first ever, that I'm aware of, fasting battle. He wasn't trying to battle me. I was just I had to outdo him at something. So Randy, he told me that, while he's locked up, he has the opportunity to do long-term fasting, which he couldn't exactly do when you're in the Navy or something like that. So he wanted to do long-term fasting while he had the opportunity. So he went 7 days on nothing but water. And after that, I went 10 days on nothing but water. I had never fasted a day in my life. My first fast, I went 10 days on nothing but water just to beat this Christian. So we would go kind of back and forth. He would fast, and then I would fast 2 or 3 days more, and he would fast, and I would fast, and so on. And he noticed. He says, "How come every time I fast, you go a couple days more?" I don't know. It's just a coincidence. Eventually, Randy went 40 days. He went 32 days on water, and then after that, he had Kool-Aid to kind of prepare his body again for food. He told me that Jesus had done that. He said, "All right, I'm going 42. Going to beat you and Jesus." So it was on day 11 when I passed out in front of a guard, busted my head on the floor. They said that I looked like a snake that was trying to stand on its tail, because I didn't remember. I just remember standing up and then waking up on the floor with a bunch of guys looking at my face. But they said that I looked like a snake standing on its tail before I collapsed. So they knew my mental health history. They knew that I'd been to a couple mental hospitals by this point. So they stuck me in a camera cell with a camera watching me at all times because I thought I was trying to kill myself. So notice, I'm trying to beat the Christian. They think I'm trying to commit suicide really, really slowly. Right? But I was back there in this cell, and thanks to various Christian ministries, there are awesome Christian libraries with the chaplain in jails, and thanks to book donations and so on, you have awesome libraries there. And I decided that I was going to do a lot of studying back there when I was in this little cell. Obviously, if Randy was defeating me when we argued, and I'm superior to him in every way, the only basis for him holding his own against me was that he just happened to have studied this stuff, whereas I hadn't. And therefore, if I study this stuff, then I will know what I'm talking about, and then it'll all be over. So I resolved to study, at least the origins of Christianity and so on, and that I was going to go back to E Block, see Randy again, and then this finally crush him. So I was back there, and I was doing these sets of Bible studies that you you get this pack of Bible studies, and then you read all the passages, and then you answer all the questions, and you write these essays, and you send them out, and they grade them, and they send them back to you, and so on. So I'm just doing pack after pack after pack of these Bible studies. I was reading. I wasn't just studying Christianity at first. I was reading the dialogues of Plato and the Enchiridion of Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius. I hated him, but I liked Epictetus. So I was reading philosophy back then, but I started focusing more on just Christian stuff, because that kind of became a brief obsession. And as I was going along, well, keep in mind, I'm a little mental. And so I would be reading, and it would be like something was talking to me based on something that was happening that day, right? So for instance, I'm about, 280 pounds right now. I was about 230, 235-ish when I got locked up. Through not eating because of Randy, I got down to under 150 pounds. And as I got down to under 150 pounds, which would be fine if I were like that tall, but I'm taller than that, I would pass out more and more. I would stand up, and I would get tunnel vision where I could only see in an area like this in front of me. And I had no basis for thinking this, but I kept thinking that, this tunnel is going to get smaller and smaller until it's gone, and then I'm just dead. And was not doing well at this point. They put this, they had this clamp on that goes on your finger that tests your blood pressure. Actually said I was dead when I got it 150. They clamped it on my finger, and it says you have zero blood pressure. They had to put a bigger one on my arm to actually get a reading. But by this time I was, my skin was turning yellow. I had a rash all over me. Again, I would pass out if I tried to stand up. And I'm sitting there, reading, fasting, and planning to refute Christianity. But I was sitting there one day, and I was thinking, wow, they bring me trays of food every day, and I'm sitting here starving to death, and I'm about to die of starvation. And I would think that, and then I would be doing my daily reading, and then it would be, Jesus said, I am the bread of life. He who comes to me will never go hungry. So that sort of thing kept happening over and over again. And again, I have some problems with delusional thinking, so you can imagine how those kinds of things would stand out to someone who already, has a history of thinking that pets are communicating with him. So this sort of thing would happen. And then as I just kept reading, basically three things started bothering me and started making me rethink what I believe. The first is kind of an obvious one. I thought I invented it, called the design argument. Thought I invented it. Turns out people have been talking about the design argument for a long, long time. But I was just looking at the bricks in my cell, and I was looking at how the bricks were stacked up. And I thought, if someone told me that these bricks went into this order by some natural process, I'd smack them in the mouth for saying something so stupid. And yet I believe that life formed on its own, when even the simplest life is vastly more complicated than some bricks stacked up. So I was thinking, why did I accept that claim based on the authority of some 10th grade biology teacher that life can form on its own? Why did I accept something like that without questioning it, without saying, I'm going to need to see some good evidence here? Why did I accept it? It didn't make me believe in God, but it made me think that I had been a little too hasty in some of the things that I picked up. So that started bothering me. The next thing that started bothering me was how the apostles died. Because when I would visit my grandmother when I was young, she would make me go to church. It was the worst, most horrible time of the week. I would sit there and stare at this little clock on the wall for an hour and then run downstairs and get brownies. But even when I was little, I thought that I had an explanation. I thought that I figured out Christianity and that I had an explanation. So they told me, the apostles were going around and that they had witnessed Jesus risen from the dead and so on. And Even then, I figured out how to explain this. It was very simple. These guys believed in Jesus, then he died. And so they wanted to keep his movement going. And so what did they do in order to keep his movement going? They made up a story about him rising from the dead to keep people interested in him and his teachings. Right? So they made up a miracle to keep the movement alive. Problem solved. Problem solved. Well, then in jail, I found out how these guys died. And they went to their horrible, bloody deaths, tortured and killed over and over again, over a period of decades for some of them, and never wavered in their claim that Jesus had appeared to them, risen from the dead. Now, there's a rule. There's a rule. The rule is liars make poor martyrs. The idea is if you're lying about what you believe, you're not going to make a very good martyr when the sword's at your throat or the gun's at your head. Now, to be clear, people die for things that are false all the time. When terrorists crash their planes into buildings, that doesn't tell you that what they believe or what they claim is true. But it does tell you they really believe that. Right? When someone crashes his plane into a building for his ideology, that tells me, okay, whatever else I know about him, I know he really believed what he's dying for here. Well, notice, there's a difference between people today, Christians or Muslims or someone else. There's a difference between people today dying for what they believe and the apostles dying for what they were claiming. Today, if I'm willing to die for what I believe, then it's based on a message I heard, and I believed that message, I believed that report, and I became so convinced that this is true or that I have good evidence for this that I'm willing to die for it. Notice, that doesn't tell you that what I believe is true, it just tells you I'm really convinced that I have good reasons to think that this is true. Well, the apostles weren't dying for some message that they heard and they really believed. They were dying for something that they said they saw. That's a different category, right? So when a Muslim today dies for what he believes, that tells me he really believes what he's dying, but what was it? It was a message that he heard from someone else and he believed it. When the apostles were dying for something they saw, the question that arises is, what did they see? What did they see that convinced all of these guys that someone had appeared to them, risen from the dead? And not just what did these guys see that convinced them that a man had risen from the dead. What did these guys see that not only initially convinced them that he had risen from the dead, that even decades later, as they're still being tortured and killed, they can still say, nope, there's no way. There was no way that I didn't see that. You have to have seen something that really shook you to your core. So what did these guys see? It obviously wasn't like a coat rack in the corner. Hey, is that Jesus? Yeah, I think it was. Yay, let's go out and die horrible, bloody deaths. Couldn't have been a hallucination. Could have been a hallucination if you had one guy, right? Once you have multiple people all seeing the same guy, that's a different category. So I sat there and I tried to think of one person in all of history who died for something that he knew he made up, and I couldn't think of one person. So what are the odds that Jesus got all of them in history? Right? Jesus got all the guys in history who were willing to die for something that they made up. Didn't make any sense. So basically my explanation for Christianity fell apart. And I was still left wondering, what did these guys see? Because the only thing I could think of that could give them that level of confidence that a man had appeared to them risen from the dead was that they actually saw a man who had been dead, and they knew he was dead, and he appeared to them, risen from the dead. Couldn't think of any other explanation. That didn't convince me that Christianity is true, but it got me wondering, wow, maybe I shouldn't be putting together my final theories on religion when I was 10 or 11 years old and had never investigated anything. So that started bothering me. And the final thing that started bothering me was, I guess it's a kind of a moral argument. It's not a normal moral argument. A normal moral argument would be something along the lines of, if God doesn't exist, then objective moral values or duties don't exist. In other words, if there's no standard beyond us, then we sort of are the standard ourselves, but we have all sorts of different views, so it's kind of all just weird, right? So you can go to different places in the world. You could go to Pakistan in certain areas, and there are people who will kill their sisters for walking down the street wearing the wrong outfit, right? Here in the U.S., we would look at that and say, oh, no, that's horrible. You can't do that sort of thing. Well, who's right? Who's right? Well, if there's nothing beyond ourselves, then we're just kind of making this up as we go along. You only have kind of two sources. If there is no standard beyond ourselves, you kind of only have two sources of what's right and wrong. One, it could be hardwired into us somehow, right? We're just wired that way. So we have a kind of herd instinct that makes us look out for other people and care for other people. That doesn't really tell you if something is right or wrong, though, in any moral sense. It just tells you how you're wired, right? Like a lion that moves into another pride of lions will kill all the baby lions to make room for its own offspring. That doesn't tell you anything about right or wrong. It's just the lion is wired to do that sort of thing. Well, if we're wired to do certain things and to behave in certain ways, that doesn't tell you if it's right or wrong. It just tells you that through our development, that's how we are now. It doesn't tell you anything really about right and wrong. It just tells you what you feel about right and wrong because of the way your brain is wired. And then you got people like me who aren't wired in the same way and don't have the same feelings, and then we think it doesn't apply to us. So that's one source. The other source would just be, this is what society teaches you. And again, you go to one society, it teaches one thing. Go to a different society, it teaches something completely different. What's the standard? There is none. So that's sort of a normal moral argument, that if our moral claims are anything beyond complete nonsense, then there has to be a standard. That standard would be something like God. I wasn't thinking along those lines. I was thinking more in terms of something like this. You may have noticed earlier that there was kind of a contradiction in my thinking. On the one hand, I said, I believe that here's this massive universe, and we're this tiny little speck, and we're just these little pointless lumps of cells, and nothing we do matters at all. Nothing changes anything. So everything we do is pointless. Whether you kill a bunch of people or whether you spend your life dedicated to helping other people, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things. It's all pointless. So I believed that. I also believed that I was the greatest, most important human being the world had ever seen, and things were sort of leading up to me. Now, those things don't go well together, right? If it's all just meaningless and pointless, what sense does it make to say, hey, I'm the most significant, greatest, meaningless lump of cells in the universe? It doesn't make any sense, right? If everything we do is completely irrelevant, it doesn't matter, and it's pointless and meaningless, then that would apply to me. On the other hand, if there is really a greatest human being, then now you're stuck back. Now you're dealing with standards and so on again. What is it to be the greatest? And the problem I had is, well, if there is some standard or scale or something like that of what makes a person better than anyone else, what are the odds that it's me, not someone else, not someone like Jesus, whom I was reading about? So, I don't know, but fasting does have one really cool outcome. You tend to start thinking very clearly at times. And basically in a very short amount of time, it all of a sudden just hit me. Wait a minute, look at this. I'm a guy who's sitting in a cell. The doctor is threatening to tube feed me. I'm about to be sent to another mental hospital. I'm in here for bashing my dad's head in with a hammer. I sit around thinking about torturing people when I'm not reading. I can't stand up without falling over. I'm starving even though they bring food every day. I'm scratching myself bloody from this rash, and I can't stop drooling. In what way am I better than anyone? And I went, again, in a very short period, from thinking that I was the greatest human being in the world to thinking that I was the worst human being in the world. And there's something cool about that. Because once you're convinced that you're really messed up, right? If you're the greatest human being in the world, you kind of don't need anybody, right? If you finally realize how messed up you are, you kind of have two possibilities ahead of you, right? Either I'm all messed up and I have serious problems, and this is just the way things are. I am messed up by nature. Or there's someone out there who can help with this sort of thing. Either I'm really messed up and that's just the way things are, I'm a horrible, violent person, or there's someone out there who can help with this sort of thing. And when you start thinking like that, I'd say you're about 2 inches away from becoming a Christian. Because when you ask yourself, who, out of anyone in all of history, who had the ability to take this emotionally, spiritually, morally horrible and crushed people and give them new life, you get a list of one person in all of history who could do that sort of thing. And it ain't Muhammad, I'll tell you that. I don't mean just because I don't believe Muhammad. I mean, take out all the Muslim sources, show me where Muhammad did that kind of thing, even according to their sources. You can't. Show me where Buddha could. You can't. You get a list of one dude, Jesus, right? So, even here, this didn't convince me that Christianity was true, so I wasn't confident that Jesus had this ability. It was more like, it's Jesus or nothing, right? Either Jesus is who the Bible claims he is, in which case, there's hope for someone like me, or that's all a bunch of made-up stuff, and I'm stuck like this. Well, it got to the point where I was thinking, well, what have I got to lose here? If I'm already the most horrible thing most horrible person in the world, and I pray, and it turns out not to be true, it's not like I'm getting any worse. I'm just in the same boat that I'm already in. So why wouldn't I pray, right? Why wouldn't I do that, right? It's like if you're drowning in the middle of the ocean and some life raft goes, beside you, you could sit there and think, well, maybe that's my enemy or something like that, or maybe it's just going to sink too or something like that. But obviously, you'd have to grab onto that. So anyway, I bowed down on my bunk and I prayed, and I said, God, I don't know if I'm going to believe in you tomorrow, but I believe in you right now, and if you can do anything with me, you are welcome to it. And then so I went on and prayed kind of the sinner's prayer that would come in the Bible studies that they sent me. And when I sat up from that prayer, everything, the cell, the bars, everything, it all looked like it was a different color, like everything had somehow changed colors, or that I had different colored glasses on or something like that. But everything looked weird to me, like I was seeing something for the first time there. And don't trust your feelings too much, but people ask, what it felt like and things like that. I felt like, because people say, they feel like a weight had been lifted off them or something like that. Mine was a little different. I felt like I had been fighting, and I don't mean metaphorically. I mean, I felt like I had been physically brawling my entire life from the time I was born, so much so that I didn't even realize that there was anything different. Felt like I'd been physically brawling my entire life, and then all of a sudden it just stopped, and I sat down. So that's what it was like. And so I was sitting there thinking, wow, this is a cool change. Didn't know if it would last or if that would change or something like that, but I still had years to go in prison for things I'd done. But I spent probably 4, 6, 8 hours a day studying the Bible and Christian apologetics and so on. And it was interesting because for years, I still thought of myself as like this horrible person, like the worst person walking around. So I'm walking through prison, and I always felt like I am the worst person around here. I am horrible. I'm a really, really bad person. Didn't realize that everyone around me over time was starting to think that I was like a really good person, which is weird because you're changing day by day. You don't always notice the changes over time. But I remember when I was in Central State Psychiatric Hospital in Virginia. I was running my mouth one day, and an administrator heard everything I was saying, and he said, "Wow, if that's what you really think, then they have got you in the right place." And it was exactly what I thought, right? But this is an administrator saying you were in the right place here. Fast forward about 4 years, and I was walking through the dorm one day, and a guy was sweeping the floor. His name was Floyd, and he's sweeping the floor, and he goes, "Wood, me and a couple of the other guys here were wondering, we're trying to figure out how someone like you could get locked up. Here's what we think. We think you're walking down the street with your girlfriend. Someone disrespected her. You stood up for her, maybe hit him a little too hard, and you got locked up." And I was like, "What? Wait, you think I'm a good guy? You think that the only reason I could get locked up is if I'm defending a woman's honor? That's what you guys think about me?" And so that's when it was a weird feeling, thinking, "Whoa, I'm like a good guy now." And that was really a really strange feeling. But so I had to finish out my sentence and got out of prison, and immediately went to school at Old Dominion University. And just to tie it back in with what you know, joined the speech and debate team, and then went on a school trip where we're going to be competing in another school. Ended up in a hotel room with a guy named Nabil. That's all I knew about him at that point, was that he was named Nabil Qureshi. So probably some sort of Muslim, but you don't know. Could be very secular, could be very liberal, could be very devout, you don't know. And was sitting there in the room, and I noticed as Nabil was putting his things away that he was putting his prayer rug away. I'm thinking, okay, he's at least devout enough to bring his prayer rug to a school trip so he can do his prayers. So he's taking it somewhat seriously at least. But I started praying. I was reading the Bible, doing the Bible and reading the Bible in a year at this point. I remember I was reading Isaiah, and I was praying, and I said, "God, if you want me to talk to this guy, could you please let him start it? Because I don't want everyone tomorrow saying, 'What are you doing attacking the Muslim? What are you doing criticizing the Muslim, right? What are you doing, right?' I don't want to hear that. So let him start it, and that way if people have a problem, I say, 'Hey, he started it.'" So right after I prayed that, Nabil said, "So, are you a hardcore Christian?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And that weekend, Nabil shared all his views with me. And the whole time I'm thinking, "Dude, you have no idea what I just been through. You have no clue who you're messing with, but continue. Keep going, keep talking." And so Nabil just explained to me everything that he believes, and he was really confident back then. He told me that Islam is proven true by science and history and logic and mathematics, and everything proves that Islam is true. And if you just examine it with an open heart, you see that all of this proves that Islam is true. So he went through all of that, and once he had just shared everything, I said, "All right, well, now I know what you believe. I have a question for you. If you're wrong, do you want to know it?" Because some people say no. It's usually atheists. I ask that to everyone. Once they tell me what they believe, if I'm deciding, hey, how much time am I going to spend? Hey, if you're wrong, do you actually want to know it? If God did exist, would you want to know it? If Jesus is Lord, would you want to know it? And so, again, some people say yes. Some people say yes, some people say no. If people say no, it's all right, talk about football or something. Until that part of you changes, you have just acknowledged that you don't care. You don't care about these things. Nabil said yes and no. He said, yes, I would want to know the truth about God, but no, it would destroy my family. And so those were the kind of dual loyalties Nabil had over the years. And I got to watch those things play out with Nabil on the one hand, clinging to his family loyalty and deathly afraid of hurting his family and embarrassing and shaming his family. But also him searching because he did want to know the truth about God. And it was cool because one day Nabil and I were arguing about the resurrection, and a young woman walked up to us, started arguing with both of us. She said, she walked up to us and said, "You're both right." And Nabil and I both turned. We're like, "What in the name of common sense are you talking about?" I'm saying he rose from the dead. He's saying he didn't rise from the dead. Those are the only two possibilities. One of us has to be right, the other is wrong. Under no circumstances are we both right. And what she really meant was, she was like an agnostic, but she's like a friendly agnostic. So whatever you believe is true for you. It helps you in life. It's true for you. So we still thought that was ridiculous. But we started arguing for a while, and she was really fun to argue with. But she's not as friendly as she led on at the beginning. Like she was the sort of person who she would make her point, and when you started arguing back, then she would start laughing in your face at what you were saying. So this was going on for a little while. Anyway, we liked arguing so much that we got married. But it was cool because so her name's Marie. She's my wife. But then 2 weeks. 2 weeks. It took her 2 weeks from telling us that we were both right, and she's an agnostic, to her becoming a Christian, versus someone like Nabil. Nabil, it was year after year after year. It was 4 years from the time we first started having our discussions to the time Nabil finally became a Christian. And I started noticing those differences, right? You could be talking to an atheist or an agnostic, and as long as that person is serious about examining the evidence and going where it points, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, person's ready to become a Christian. Nabil, 4 years, and that's actually fast. Statistically, that's pretty fast. On average, the average Muslim who converts to Christianity takes about 7 years from the time the gospel is presented to him. And so I was noticing this sort of thing, wow, lots of people can convert really quickly. Muslims take a really long time, and it's very difficult. Not a lot of Billy Graham crusades dealing with Muslims, right? You see a Billy Graham crusade? Billy Graham gets up, preaches a 10-minute message, and thousands of people come down to accept Christ. It's awesome. It doesn't work that way, really, with Muslims. And the reason is, you go to a Billy Graham crusade, it would mostly be people who already believed in Christianity, right? They already believed in God. They already believed in the Bible. They believed in Jesus. They just never made any sort of commitment. They never accepted it. And so Billy Graham would go and preach, what are you waiting for? Let me lay out the message very clearly. If you believe it, what are you waiting for? And people would say, okay, I do believe this, so I need to commit to this. Muslims kind of in a different category. And here's what I noticed. A lot of Christians have a kind of Billy Graham crusade mindset with evangelism. Like you preach the message and bam, people convert, or they're just hard-hearted and you move on. And there were people, there were Christians, there were important Christians in my life who were telling me, what are you doing spending day after day, month after month, year after year talking to this one guy, staying up all night over and over again, talking to this one guy, when you could be talking to so many other people. You could be talking to so many atheists. You could be talking to so many people. Obviously, if he's going on for years, his heart is hard. He's not going to listen. And I would just be thinking, no, I'm not in that boat. I'm not in the position to say, this guy's too screwed up to come to Christ, right? I can't do that. Whatever he wasn't as bad off as I was. So obviously, if I came to Christ, and then who am I to say, hey, this guy he's taken too long here. I gotta move on. My criterion was kind of one. I really believe that it wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't a coincidence that we ended up in the same hotel room. So I believe that was from God. If it was from God, why am I going to... Look, I got my marching orders, right? I've got my marching orders. And for real, this has only happened a few times, but there were a few occasions when it was almost like, hey, you see that sheep? Don't come back without that sheep. Do not come back without him. And every time that has happened, the person is converted. And so with someone like Nabil, I just wasn't in a position to say, no, you're taking too long here. It was more like, look, we get together for some of these discussions and you get crushed and you come back the next day. I have to believe that the Spirit is drawing you here. So as long as you keep coming back, we're going to keep having these discussions. And so that's kind of the place I'm in right now in life, is looking at situations they kind of look hopeless, or people who seem like they're not going to be reached. And it's just built into me at this point that, no, you keep preaching. And true, some of them aren't going to come, but some of them are. And basically, for those of you here, I would look around at the situations that you're in, the people that you know, and sometimes some of the people who seem the most hard-hearted, they can make some of the most awesome Christians, even after years and years and years, because once they come out of that, they know why they believe. They know exactly why they believe. They came into the kingdom of God kicking and screaming, and now they know exactly why they believe. So don't count people out. It's true. We know that some people are not going to make it, but we don't know who those people are. And so whatever the situation you're in, if you have a friend or a coworker, the thought that should be in your head is, hey, I've got this friend or coworker and this person believes this. Maybe I am here because I am the right person for this. And maybe I am the one who's been sent by the Almighty himself to talk to this person. And if I've been sent here by the Almighty to talk to this person, to preach to this person, to share with this person, then I am not coming back without this sheep. And so no matter how long it takes, gotta keep up. And I think we'll see some awesome Christians coming out. All right.
Can we get an applause for Dr. David Wood, please? Thank you so much. We're going to take a 7 to 10 minute break here, give Dr. Wood a few minutes to collect his thoughts, and we'll continue with a question and answer session in about 7 to 10 minutes. Biblically, how to face the Islamic challenge biblically. So if you can make it tonight, also at 7 p.m., it'll be the same format. Dr. Wood will be speaking for about an hour, and then you'll have the opportunity to ask questions and answers after that as well. Also, Dr. Wood is speaking Sunday, tomorrow morning at 10:30 a.m., and the topic of that discussion will be why suffering? How can an all-loving God allow suffering and death? And you definitely don't want to miss that. Please tell your friends and family, bring them. So tonight at 7 p.m. and tomorrow at 10:30 a.m. as well. Well, we have about 5,000 questions here. We may not get through all of them, but we'll try to go through as much as we can. We want to stay as timely as possible. Thank you, Dr. Wood. I have a question that I wanted to start with, and then we can jump into some of these other questions. We as Christians, especially in the United States, seem to have unending excuses for not sharing the gospel. We're too busy, working, family, etc., and etc. Would you mind sharing a little bit of what's going on in your life as you shared in your most recent YouTube video, which I believe you posted yesterday? And how has that helped you push through and continue to spread the gospel, kind of renew your commitment?
Oh, you mean when I talked about all my family stuff?
Yes.
How many of you, did anyone see that? Yeah, that was I normally don't say anything about that stuff, but because I hadn't posted much in like 6 weeks, everyone's, what's going on? We got to know what's going on. I'm like, well, okay, I'll tell you. So anyway, you can actually watch that on my YouTube channel if you want. But basically, come from a massively dysfunctional family background. Dad was a drug dealer when I was born. My mom is right now a recovering heroin addict. She was diagnosed with lung cancer at the beginning of last year. Took a year and a half before she actually had her surgery, but they said they were going to have to remove a lung, but they ended up saving half of her lungs, so she now has 1.5 lungs. My brothers, John and Manny, have both been to prison and jail multiple times. They're in drug programs right now to stay clean. And my brother John's wife, Brittany, who was she was in a drug program as well, because when her son was born, so my nephew, little John, was born, he was born addicted to heroin. And so John, my brother John, was already locked up at this point for robbery and guns and drugs. And little John was taken away for obvious reasons by Child Protective Services. And Brittany, she basically spent over a year getting clean. So, going to the meetings and so on. She spent over a year getting clean so that she could get her son back. She finally got her son back temporarily, and she died of a brain aneurysm about a month later. So, anyway, that's what's going on in my life, but that's what's always going on in my life. So that's the background. But I'm getting all these messages. David, I feel your pain. Guys, don't try to comfort a psychopath. It's we don't have that. We don't have that kind of pain. We can hopefully do the right thing and strive to do the right thing. And right now, I'm focused on keeping little John in the family rather than going off somewhere else. They won't let me adopt it because I'm a convicted felon and an ex-mental patient. But we do have other family members who, like my cousin Brandy, who she's squeaky clean. So we're trying to keep the son in the family, so can do what's right with the family and so on, without having a kind of emotional trauma. And so that's actually a bad part about being a psychopath. You don't have normal emotional responses to bad things happening. Family member dies, you don't feel anything. So that's a bad part. You wish you felt something. You wish you had normal reactions and so on. But the positive side is when disaster is erupting all around you, you're normally the one who stays completely calm. And so that's kind of the situation I'm in. I'm to the point in life where I think, my wiring is a bit off, but given what I do, all right, maybe I'm this way for a reason, and maybe God can even use our problems and defects in this world. So that's where I'm at with that.
Thank you, Dr. Wood. And just to preface this conversation as well, I'm going through some of these questions, and I want to try and make it as relevant as possible based on the topic that Dr. Wood is presenting. So we are going to be speaking about Islam tonight and answering questions on that as well. So just keep that in mind. Some of these questions I may use tonight as well. So we'll have Dr. Wood will have the opportunity to address those at that time as well. Here's another question. It's a two-part question. Do you still have contact with Randy? And the second part is, what do you see yourself doing in 5 years from now? Or what would you like to be doing?
Randy, yes. We send Randy money. By the way, Randy's still locked up. I got a 10-year sentence on one felony. Randy had 21 felonies. He's still locked up. But yeah, we send him money every month because it sucks being locked up and not having money. Just so you know. You think, what do you need money for? You can buy all kinds of stuff. There's a store. There's a store in prison where you can buy food other than the food that you're getting at your meal. So you can buy all kinds of things. You can buy a watch. You can buy your own shoes. You can buy things like that. So, so we're still in contact with Randy. He goes up for parole every year. He's in Virginia, and Virginia is very tough on just not letting people out. Like I went to the end of my sentence without being paroled. I still was on parole because even if you max out your sentence, you still have 2 years of parole. But every year you go up for parole, and they turn you down every year. So that's the situation with Randy. Where do I see myself in 5 years? Where
do you see yourself in 5 years? Or what would you like to be doing in 5 years?
Okay, I can answer what I would like to be doing. I mean, really, it wouldn't surprise me if I get my head chopped off within 5 years, right? Because it does happen, right? It does happen, and it's easy to say, no, it won't happen. It won't happen. It won't happen to you. But, we'll be, tomorrow we'll be talking about why God allows death and suffering. But there are situations when part of your testimony is facing death, even in the face of people who want to kill you. So it's basically a situation where, given the death threats I get, if I think, hey, even 1% of these people are serious, then there are multiple people out there who want to chop my head off. So I don't know if they'll ever do it. Wouldn't surprise me. But as far as what I'd like to do, I don't know. Right now, I'm kind of all kinds of things to do in the world, but I don't think Christians have really caught on to the power of the internet yet. Like, I have the top Christian apologetics channel in the world, and who in the world am I? I mean, I sit in front of my bookshelf recording videos. There are huge Christian ministries with huge resources, with far better speakers, and they're having a much smaller impact, and it's kind of just because they haven't recognized that we've just entered into a new era of human history, right? It's like there's before the printing press, and then there's after the printing press. Everything changed after the printing press. Well, we just reached one of those eras, and there are just lots of Christian, not just apologists, but Christian speakers and so on, preachers who they come from a ministry that's been doing things in a certain way for a long time, and then even after you have this sort of technological revolution, they're still doing things the same way. And that's fine, because that still needs to happen, right? That still needs to happen. It's much better to have interpersonal communication and so on than talking to someone on a computer screen on the other side of the world. But I think some people really need to focus on that, because we'll talk about this a little more probably tonight. But we're in a stage where think 14 centuries of Christians could not have imagined a situation. 14 centuries of Christians who were interested in witnessing the Muslims could not have imagined a situation where you can talk to a Muslim in Saudi Arabia on your cell phone, right? For 14 centuries, if you wanted to talk to Muslims, if you had a heart for Muslims, you had to go to a Muslim area, and you might get your head chopped off. In fact, if you were making a big difference, you were probably going to get your head chopped off. It was not going to go well. Now we have open access to Muslims around the world through technology. So part of my main goal right now is, again, most Christians don't need to be doing this, but more Christians need to be doing this than are currently doing it. There needs to be a much more active Christian presence, reaching people who we otherwise could not reach, because you'd have to go there, and even if you go there, you're just one person in one little area, whereas right now we're just in an age where you can get on and talk to people around the world right now, tonight, if you wanted to. And so we need some people doing that.
Thank you. Next question is, how do I equip myself with Bible revelation and knowledge to speak to Muslims or Jews or to a person of a different religion, like you did with Dr. Qureshi?
There is a common mistake, I think, that people think they need to learn everything beforehand and then go out and talk. And so that can be one of the obstacles to evangelism. They think, I don't want to talk to a Muslim. Muslim's going to have all these objections, and I'm not going to know what I'm talking about. And so you just kind of never get started. Or if you think, well, okay, maybe I'll go study for 5 years. Maybe I'll go study for 5 years, and then I'll get back, and then I'll go talk to that Muslim once I've learned everything. Whereas, if you think about my situation with Nabil, I didn't know a lot about Islam. I'd read like one book on Islam. I knew in prison, I knew some Muslims, and so we'd had discussions. So I had some general ideas, but nothing that would be required for ongoing discussions with Nabil, who'd spent his life studying that stuff. I was fine on Christian apologetics, but not with Islam. But there's no shame, as far as I can see, whether you're talking to a Muslim or a Jew or an atheist, and you get into a conversation. I don't see any shame in saying, hey, you just brought up this topic, and I haven't really studied it. Would you mind if I go and look into what you just said, and then get back to you next week, and we can meet again, and then we can have a discussion then? In fact, that's what I think is the best route. Whatever you want to go into in terms of apologetics or evangelism,
I normally tell people start off by asking questions, right? If you're talking to, let's say you're talking to a Muslim, start off with, what do you believe about this questions, right? What do you believe about God? What do you believe about the Bible? What do you believe about Jesus? What do you believe about Muhammad? What do you believe about the Quran? And just listen, right? You don't have to launch into a response right there, especially if it's someone you're going to see, you're going to see again. It's a coworker, another student or something like that. You're going to see this person again over and over and over again. You don't have to do everything at once. But you start off with these kinds of questions. What do you believe about this? And then notice now this person is telling you, and guess what? People generally like to talk about what they believe, especially Muslims, right? Think if someone were asking you, what do you believe about Jesus? Wouldn't you think that's cool that someone's asking you? And that's kind of a mindset we have to get past. Is there are people who don't like to talk about religion and politics and things like that. Your average Muslim would love to talk to you about Islam. Because on the one hand, if he takes Islam at all seriously, he's commanded, in Surah 16, verse 125 of the Quran, to invite all to the way of Islam. But apart from that, your average Muslim believes that we've all been misled by the media about Islam. And so they would love to correct us and give us a true understanding of Islam. And so kind of all you have to do is open the door, right? So notice, you're sitting there, if you're there with a Muslim, and you're wondering, hey, how do I get this conversation started? And again, this could be other kinds of people too, just using Muslims as an example. But you're sitting there wondering, wow, how do I get this conversation started? How do I talk to this person? Very easy to just open the door and say, hey, I know you're a Muslim. I've heard a little bit about Islam, never really studied it. But I was wondering, could you just tell me what you believe as a Muslim? That person would be thrilled to tell you what he believes as a Muslim or what she believes as a Muslim. So you keep asking questions about what this person believes, and eventually you transition from what do you believe questions to sort of why do you believe that questions, right? So, okay, you told me you believe such and such about the Quran. Could you tell me why you believe that? Why do you believe the Quran is the Word of God? Why do you believe the Quran is perfectly preserved? And then you start getting that person's individual reasons. Why do you believe Muhammad is a prophet? Why do you believe that Jesus was simply a prophet? Why do you believe these things? And then you start getting this person's reasons. But notice, once you have that person's particular reasons, and you've sort of zeroed in on those things, now you don't need to know all of Islam. You just need to go and study that particular person's claims. And then, so at the end of that discussion, I would say, okay, now you've said the Quran's been perfectly preserved and that Muhammad is the greatest moral example the world has ever seen. Would you mind if I went and studied those things and then got back to you so we could discuss them again? If he really believes what he just said, he thinks that you're going to go and study this and you're going to find out that he's right. So he's probably going to be thrilled. But chances are he's never studied this, whereas you will. And then so you're going to come back with, hey, you were saying this, and I just had a couple questions. And even then, I wouldn't be like, I know people, if you see my YouTube videos, I'm really like in your face and forceful and stuff like that. That's in videos. If I'm talking to someone one-on-one, like 90% of what I do is just asking the person questions. And but once you have that, it helps it not to create a bunch of tension so that the person doesn't talk to you anymore. But basically, you can continue with questions all the way down. So, hey, you said that the Quran has been perfectly preserved and that this is a miracle. I had a question. I was reading this passage from the Hadith, and it said that these verses were eaten by a sheep and that they're no longer in there. I was wondering, how do you interpret this passage? Notice you're not, hey, I want to know how you understand. And you could even make it, less aggressive. You could say, I was wondering, could you look at that? And, if this is new to you, maybe you could go look into it, maybe ask your imam about it, and then get back to me, no rush. And so it's sort of proceeding like that. So notice, it's only very rare situations where you would just have to know everything ahead of time. Like in a public debate or something like that, where you would just have to, okay, this is not a time where I have an opportunity to go back and do some research. But if you're talking to actual people who are in your lives, very easy, very easy. So I just say, open a door, ask a lot of questions, and once they give you some reasons, then start looking into those and get together for more conversations and more questions. But notice, as far as you're concerned, you're going to pick up more and more. Right? So you study this individual's reasons for believing or what he believes. But then later, when you're talking to a different Muslim, guess what? There's going to be some overlap. There's going to be some overlap. You're going to see a lot of the same things coming up. And by the time you've talked to 6 or 7 Muslims, guess what? You've heard pretty much everything. Because they don't have 500 objections that you aren't familiar with. They have about 5 to 7 objections to Christianity. And they have 5 to 7 arguments that are supposed to show that Islam is true. And so once you've talked to several people and you've looked these up, guess what? You're prepared. You're prepared for everything. So I would say kind of learn on the job. Learn as you go. But get started.
Thank you. The next question is, how do you discern God's voice and leading?
Well, the main source would obviously be Scripture, right? Don't ever get away from Scripture. But there are obviously people who are more sensitive or less sensitive. I just kind of stick to I read the Bible and I figure out the marching orders, and I just kind of keep going with that until something happens that stops me from doing that, or something that gets in the way or is sort of pushing me in a different direction. So I'm a simple man with a simple process.
All right. Next question is, why did you decide to expose Islam?
A lot of that had to do with Nabil. So I was studying Islam back then just because my best friend was a Muslim. If he'd been something else, I would have been studying something else. By the way, it's a good habit to get into, right? If you've got a friend who is something, and as I mentioned earlier, if you start getting in the habit of thinking, hey, maybe I'm here, and maybe this just isn't coincidence, and maybe I'm here because I'm the person to talk to this person, then what that person believes, you might want to start familiarizing yourself with that so that you can have conversations and present the gospel effectively to that person, given what that person already believes. Wait, what was the question?
Why did you decide to expose Islam?
Oh, yeah. So I'll probably mention this again tonight, but when Nabil became a Christian, I actually thought, cool, I'm done with Islam. Because I was interested in Islam for one reason. My best friend was a Muslim. Now my best friend was a Christian. So that was it. It was sort of realizing that Muslims make cool Christians. And there's a reason for that. And it kind of ties into what I was saying earlier. You take an agnostic or an atheist, you might talk to an agnostic or an atheist for a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, and that person becomes a Christian. And Muslims generally take a lot longer. And part of the reason why they take a lot longer is there are a lot more obstacles in the way of a Muslim. It's much more difficult. We'll be talking about those. We'll be talking about the obstacles that Muslims face tonight. But much more difficult for them to become Christians. But the cool part is, once they say, you know what, I'm going to become a Christian anyway, in spite of everything I'm going to have to face, well, they're already making a sacrifice to become a Christian. And so they make really awesome Christians, and yet, because they can be so difficult to reach and it can take so long to reach them, there aren't a lot of Christians who want to get into that. When if you think about it, you've got basically a fifth growing towards a quarter of the world's population who believe one thing. And it's only kind of a tiny fraction of a Christian apologetics that's geared towards that. And so it was more along the lines of just someone needs to do this. And it doesn't matter if I would rather be doing something else, that someone needs to do this, and well, I'm right here, so I might as well do it. But no, if we ever get to a point where there are a ton of people dealing with Islam, I'm going to do something else. I'm going to say, cool, there's enough people dealing with this, I can do something that I'm more interested in. But as of right now, got to deal with Islam because someone needs to deal with it.
Got it. This next question is a question that I've had also. I'm glad somebody asked this. Why One Punch Man?
Oh. Well, I never watched anime, and I tended to watch, lots of shows.
Maybe I should give them a quick background. So for those of you not familiar with, on Dr. Wood's YouTube channel. As he's speaking, you can see his library shelf behind it with all these different books, and he keeps a toy character that's part of a Japanese anime cartoon called One Punch Man. And his whole superpower is that he can hit somebody with one punch and completely destroy them. So, with that background, go ahead.
Yeah, so it was a situation where my two oldest sons are Luke and Blaze, and I tended to always watch shows with Blaze and not with Luke. And one day Luke came and said, "Hey, you want to watch this show called One Punch Man with me?" And I was thinking, no, I don't. But I was thinking, gosh, I need to do it. Otherwise, he just sees me, palling around with Blaze. So, all right, what's the story? And he says, well, it's this guy who, as Samir pointed out, he can destroy any opponent with one punch. I was thinking, wow, this is going to get boring real quick. And then we started watching the first episode, and it was the most hilarious thing I'd ever seen. Is the idea in the show is this guy's miserable and depressed and has no feeling anymore because all opponents are too easy for him to defeat. And so he just walks around miserable and dejected because he can't find a worthy opponent that he can't just crush. So, so anyway, I thought it was hilarious, and so I just started putting that around there, and it's kind of a message to other to people out there who might watch this show that I could crush you with one punch of my mind, right?
Thank you for that. Here's an interesting one. By the way, I have a lot of...
By the way, I'm thinking of starting a channel called One Punch Apologetics just for...
That might work, yeah. I'm noticing a lot of questions related to Islam. Just keep in mind, we do have a special discussion tonight at 7 p.m. that'll be dealing directly with Islam, and some of these questions I will bring back, and we'll address those at that time as well. So the next question is, what is the biggest surprise in your life?
Probably my son Kepler, born last year. Totally unexpected. Taking every precaution known to man, and apparently nothing can stop me. I don't know.
Fair enough.
I don't know how to put that, but it was shocking, right? What? Well, I'm like 1,000,000 years old now. Anyway.
Here's an Islam question that I will ask. Is there any place in the Quran that Allah offers Muslims heaven as Jesus offered to his children?
I mean, you have plenty of claims in the Quran that if you obey Allah, then you're good to go. But you also do not have assurance in the Quran. Even Muhammad was told to say by Allah, I do not know what Allah is going to do to me. So this is Muhammad. And that, by the way, that is in the context of salvation. The historical background for that claim, as it's used in the Quran, the historical background in Sahih al-Bukhari is that a Muslim died and a woman said, "Congratulations, you're in paradise now." He's dead. And Muhammad said, "What? You don't know that?" And she said, "Well, I mean, this is like the nicest Muslim around. If he's not there, if we can't say he's in paradise, who's safe?" And Muhammad said, "I don't know what Allah is going to do with me." And so you have these claims, hey, obey. Here's the situation. You have these claims, obey Allah, and you'll be all right. But how do you know if you've obeyed Allah enough? If even the greatest of all Muslims, Muhammad, still couldn't say with complete confidence what Allah was going to do with him. So the situation that Muslims are in is most Muslims are not aware of this. They do not know that their own prophet said that he didn't know what Allah was going to do with him. The second greatest Muslim of that generation was Muhammad's companion Abu Bakr. Abu Bakr said, "If I had one foot in paradise, I would still fear Allah's deception." In other words, if I had one foot in paradise, I would still think, given the God that we serve, I would still be worried that he's just messing with me. So there is not a lot of assurance of salvation, whereas in Christianity, you're in Jesus' hand, you're in the Father's hand, and so you have assurance of salvation. It is yeah, it's different. The offers are different. And the guarantee you have, the time you do have a guarantee is if you die during jihad. That's where you actually have your guarantee.
I want to be respectful of Dr. Wood's time as well. I'm going to go ahead and ask one more question. We are past noon right now. This is an interesting question. Your apologetic approach is primarily focused on Muslims and Islam. How do you go about discussing or using apologetics with a Hindu? Do you have any experience or any encounters using apologetics with a Hindu?
No. I would normally. By the way, I have a ton of Hindu followers online because Hindus are also really, really interested in arguing against Islam for obvious reasons. So I have a ton of Hindu followers, but when someone says, "Hey, hey, David, make a video on Hinduism and showing why Hinduism is wrong," it's normally in my mind. I don't study Hinduism, and I wouldn't want to. I don't like to talk about stuff unless I spend a lot of time studying it because I don't want to make mistakes. But basically, if a Hindu has questions, I normally turn them towards someone who deals with that sort of thing. And so, yeah, I think if you're there are people who can kind of do general apologetics, and it doesn't matter, they learn a bunch of different areas. And there are people who kind of focus on one area or maybe two areas. But yeah, I believe if you're really going to do one or two areas really, really well, then you have to spend the bulk of your time dealing with those kinds of issues. And so, yeah, if I were in a situation, it doesn't have to be a Hindu. It could be Hindu, Mormon, could be anything. I would normally say, hey, I know a guy who deals with this and who studies this a lot, and be better to ask your questions there.
Again, I apologize if I didn't get to your question. As I'd mentioned, tonight at 7 p.m. we'll be discussing Islam, and I think we'll spend a little extra time in the question and answer sessions and going through some of the questions that you had asked today. So at this time, just want to thank Dr. David Wood for being here this morning. We look forward to hearing from him this evening. And I'd like to ask him to come and close us in prayer.